Welcome to Machine Minds, where technology and humanity meet. I'm your host, Greg Terusian, founder of Samson Rose, a recruiting and search business focused on the robotics and AI industries. The Machine Minds show is where we dive deep into the intricate world of robotics and artificial intelligence. As a staffing industry leader with a passion for the frontiers of technology, I'm pleased to be bringing you intimate conversations with the founders, investors, and trailblazers who are at the heart of the AI and robotics revolution. In each episode, we dig into their journeys, the applications of the products they're working on, and the breakthroughs that are shaping our future. Join us as we explore how these machine minds are transforming the way we live, work, and understand our world. Whether you're an entrepreneur, a tech enthusiast, or just curious about this amazing field, you'll learn something new with each episode. Let's delve into the extraordinary. Let's delve into machine minds. Hello and welcome to Machine Minds. I'm your host, Greg Terusian, founder of Samson Rose, your robotics talent search partner. And on today's episode, I'm joined by Patrick Leung, CTO of Faro Health. Thanks for being on the show today, Patrick.
Hey, Greg. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Let's jump into it. So, Patrick, we've spoken obviously prior to this show, and then I was going through your LinkedIn doing a bit of research, and you've had this diverse career in software development and leadership, including notable roles at Google and Two Sigma. Can you give us a high level of your career prior to joining Faro Health?
Sure. Yeah, I started my career in the .com era. And so I was employee number one at a company that ended up going public doing e-commerce, was one of the first e-commerce systems. So I got to see soup to nuts, like going from employee number one to 350 people, and then all the way back down pretty much to close to zero again. So that was a super interesting way to start off my career when I came to this country. I'm originally from New Zealand. And then I ended up spending about 11 years at Google. And that was a huge learning experience. At Google, they encourage you to change teams a lot. And so I got to work on a bunch of different groups, including emerging markets, Google Maps. And then my final team was this conversational AI project called Google Duplex. That was really a super interesting AI project that essentially called up businesses on the user's behalf and kind of had really lifelike conversations with them. That was a huge learning experience. And then after that, I worked at Two Sigma Investments, which is one of the world's largest algorithmic hedge funds based in New York. And they have a private equity division that has both private equity and venture. So I worked for a couple of years applying data science and AI to private investing, which is actually really challenging. And I learned a lot about the way the economy works and how investment works and all these good things. And then I struck out on my own and I started a company that essentially was focused on using AI to perform carbon financing for nature restoration. So I did that for 3 or 4 years, which was really fun, super mission driven. And at that point, I decided, from now on, I only ever want to do completely mission driven initiatives in my career. And so after that, I heard about Faro through a friend of mine who's on the board. And basically, it was a very new domain for me. My father is a heart surgeon, so he's in the life, the medical field. And so I'd always been curious about what he does. And he was super thrilled because he's really into pharmaceuticals, having treated people for a long time during the course of his career for conditions such as lung cancer and so on. And so we got to connect on this whole endeavor. And basically, I really, really connect with this whole mission of bringing cutting edge new medicines to people faster and cheaper. And so I fell in love with the mission, came on board late 2023, and it's been a really amazing ride since applying AI to this field of clinical drug trial development.
That's awesome. That is awesome. So I love the whole mission-driven focus as well. Were there other areas that you had kind of considered, or other industries or anything like that you'd considered moving into prior to finding out about Faro Health, or was it just right time, right opportunity, right mission for you?
It's just one of those things where during the course of 2023, life sciences kept on popping up. Like I was doing a bit of consulting work and sort of found that it was an area that was really super rife for improvements via AI. And then I just sat down with a friend of mine who's really experienced with just applying AI to different industries, and he told me life sciences is the place. Like that is the obvious place where AI can really take hold and have an impact. And so those words really resonated with me and just got me thinking more in that direction. And then Faro came along, and so I jumped on it.
Very cool. All right, let's spend the most time, the biggest chunk, talking about Faro Health. So can you explain for everyone what the company does and the primary challenges that it addresses in clinical trial design?
Absolutely. Yeah, so Faro essentially created a new space within life sciences focused on clinical trial design. So I'm sort of new to this, at least I was when I started at Faro. And so it took me a while to really understand how things are currently done. And it really surprised me. I mean, a clinical trial, as you can imagine, is a really complicated thing. It's kind of like a giant plan that can last many, many, many years and involve hundreds of people and involves multiple sites and lots of complex medical procedures and so on. And by and large, these historically have been stored and authored in Word docs. And, I had this sort of, my catch cry was like not even Excel. Because, in the finance industry, I consider them to be quite backward in many ways, just being really dependent upon Excel for so many things.
Yeah.
Which, as we know, was first launched in the 1980s. And so, a Word doc is not even as structured as Excel. And so Faro, Scott Chatham, the founder and CEO, came along and founded this company with the thesis that we can really up-level the way that clinical trials are designed and developed by actually creating a purpose-built system, like a SaaS system, for essentially modeling the trials and providing analytics and providing visibility into things like, okay, what's the experience for the patient going to be like? What's the patient burden? How much blood is being drawn? How much cost and complexity are the sites going to incur? All this kind of thing. So these analytics are really valuable in terms of guiding the design of a trial and making sure that it gets launched on time and doesn't incur amendments with the FDA that can cost months and months of time and millions of dollars, and ensuring that the trial is going to enroll patients, which is a really big challenge. So this was the underlying thesis, and it's really played out very well. The company has a number of blue chip customers and is growing really fast. And so I came on board to really jumpstart the company, accelerate its adoption of AI, and essentially really figure out ways in which AI can make this process of clinical trial design and development even better.
So was AI an initial part of the product that they wanted to incorporate, or was it now bringing you in to really take it to that next level and focus on the AI elements?
I think it's fair to say that the company had a number of ideas around this, because I came in and Scott immediately kind of told me like, hey, we think that AI-driven clinical protocol documentation generation is a very fertile use case. Please look into that. But they didn't really have any data scientists on board per se until I came along. And since then, I've built a team. I've sort of hired a team of people underneath and within my group to essentially work on this stuff. So it was super interesting to me. Like I love the whole greenfield, like what can we do sort of opportunities. And I really feel like life sciences is such a unique industry in so many ways. And in some ways, so advanced. Like all the things you hear about in drug discovery, they sound like science fiction, right? Like genetically engineering T blood cells and injecting them back into the patient. And I mean, the future is so incredible when you think through the implications of all these advances going on at the early stages of the whole process of drug development. But there is this bottleneck, there is this kind of process that takes, I couldn't believe it. So I talk about this now at conferences, right? They have this thing called Eroom's law, which is more spelled backwards, right? It's kind of like a dark humor, right? Because it basically says that unlike Moore's law, where things are getting better, exponentially better and better with respect to chip density, we have Eroom's law, which is that drug development costs and time are doubling every 9 years. So it's wow. For the last 50 years, it's held. Wow. And so the hope is, AI can bend Eroom's law, and we'll be able to get these drugs to market much faster. But the fact is that these new treatments, so these new technologies that we're talking about, involving CRISPR and all this kind of stuff, they actually make the trials more complex. And so this is pushing this kind of these countervailing winds of complexity that Faro really is seeking to address.
Why are things getting so much more expensive? Is it like more red tape, more steps, or is it new companies, new departments being created because there's so much money in it? Like, what's your opinion on that?
I mean, there's so many factors. I've thought about this a lot in terms of just how can Faro sort of really address this. There's one which is the underlying drugs are getting, there's a lot of innovation there. And so we need to devise new ways of ensuring that these drugs can actually be tested and run through the whole development process. There's also this effect that over time, in many cases, drug companies, it's becoming so expensive to produce these trials that there's some amount of copy and pasting going on where trials become more and more bloated over time as, the scientists say, oh, we need to measure this and that. Let's just do what we did before, but add more. And so without analytics and without visibility into the cost of that, there is a certain amount of trial inflation going on. There is also this factor of diversity. This is super important, right? Like, historically, a lot of trials were performed on white males because they're easiest to recruit and because, various biases involved in creating the trials. And the fact is, and I didn't know this before I got into this field, the fact is that different people of different racial backgrounds and genders and so on have different physiologies. And so for the same height and weight, the same medication can have drastically different effects. So we need to have more diverse trials. Yeah. And that actually makes the trials more complicated and more difficult to enroll and all sorts of factors. Yeah.
So we're going down a separate rabbit hole, but that's why I love conversations like this. What is the right way of structuring a trial then, if you really want it to be a good glimpse of like a population? Say, for example, I grew up in London, crazy diverse city, or, LA, which I'm not far from now, very diverse as well. Instead of just getting all white males, do you have to go to these cities to recruit people for the trials? Do you start doing trials internationally to try and get a right glimpse of the real true data for these populations, or what's the best way of doing it?
Yeah, there's various strategies. Patient enrollment is a big thing. You have to sort of talk to the right sites that meet the criteria that are going to basically satisfy the needs of your trial. And so it all comes down to kind of planning. And so once again, a Word doc is not the greatest place to be planning such things. And so we don't directly deal with patient enrollment because that is a process that occurs a little bit further down the line. But what we do is provide this platform where the trial can be really modeled in a very structured way that can then in principle be used to help to drive the patient recruitment and other downstream operational aspects of the trial. But it's kind of like, one of the things I learned early on in my career in tech is that the most expensive mistakes you make are the ones early on when you're first designing a product. Okay. Yep. And so if you're building, the most extreme example is if you're building the wrong features that people actually don't want, that's the most expensive, mistake of all. And I think that holds with clinical trial design as well. Like if you make mistakes up front, like by having all these unnecessary activities or not thinking through the risks of patient enrollment or, patient burden and so on, then more than likely you're going to run into issues with the FDA and then you're going to have to file amendments. And then you're in this world of, oh my God, we're going to get to market 6 months, a year, 2 years late, which costs, tens of millions of dollars. And we're going to have all these expensive clinical writers, writing all these amendments and trying to make the FDA happy. So these are design issues. And so that's really where Faro sits, is the early stage. Like after you've got your concept sheet, you basically have this thesis that you want to apply this drug to that, to a certain indication. That's where we come in and we can help you to make sure you don't make those kind of fundamental mistakes.
That's awesome. So it sounds like you mentioned it's built from the ground up to address a lot of the issues or gaps in the industry that the founders saw. Are there other platforms that are trying to do something similar, or are you guys creating your whole new lane here?
We have people that are kind of following in our footsteps. So we actually see examples of competitors directly. This is kind of funny. So a competitor that will remain unnamed actually copied our UI to the extent that they actually copied an error in the UI. And when I heard about this, I thought we should tell them.
Yeah.
Tell them that they should fix that bug, because we fixed it already.
Anyway, we know what you're doing because we've seen the bug.
And so that's great. That's a validation. There are a few companies that are really, in this as well. And this is good. This is a good thing. Choice is good and competition is good. But for sure, we were the first ones in there. And we are going to stay that way by essentially being on the cutting edge of applying AI to this field as well.
Love that. So the emphasis on AI-powered protocol design, can you elaborate on how AI is integrated into the platform, and then obviously the platform built from the ground up has a huge amount of benefits already that you talked about. But I'm curious about the mass. We spoke about this offline previously, the time it takes for some of this stuff, the complexities, and you talked about rewriting everything, but the benefits of incorporating AI for everyone along this process. Like, can you talk more to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the power of LLM, large language models, LLMs, including GPT and Gemini and Llama and all the rest, this is undeniable, right? Like everybody at this point has played with GPT or the like, right? And we all know that it's capable of putting together prose, answering questions, summarizing things, all sorts of amazing things. And it's easy to kind of fall into this maybe sort of belief that it actually knows what it's talking about and it's really intelligent and it knows stuff and you can just have this intelligent conversation. The mental model that I really like to and this is slightly debatable, there's philosophical arguments here, but I really think of these systems ultimately as incredibly well-informed autocomplete. And meaning all it's doing is taking a stream of words and statistically calculating the most likely word that should come next. That is it. And of course, there's a whole ton of complexity there. It's processing, in some cases, trillions of data items and parameters and so on. But that's kind of in principle what it's doing. And so as a result, oftentimes, like it will just make things up. Like we call this hallucination, right? And then the complement of hallucination is omission. Like it'll just not mention things that are important because that just didn't come up in the statistical model of what I wanted to say. And so as a result, when you really try to produce clinical grade documentation that needs to have certain content present and needs to be correct, you can't just throw it into an LLM, no matter how much prompt, no matter how sophisticated your prompt input is, and no matter how much data you have, because of course, many of these sections that we're generating are highly technical and have a lot of quantitative data. And so that's where Faro comes in, right? As we have this really sophisticated structured repository that has all the schedule and the schema and the objectives and endpoints and everything stored in a structured way. We put that all as input. We also accept as input into the system documentation that the client might have, the customer, like around molecule information that also is needed for certain sections to be generated. However, no matter how high quality your inputs are, no matter how sophisticated your prompts are and your model, the output needs to be tested. And so we devised this evaluation model that takes the generated output, whatever section that might be from the protocol, and then it has a checklist. And it basically goes one by one, all those different tests, and applies the test and asks questions like, is this content present? Is this detail present? Is this the correct sort of length? Are there all these attributes that need to be tested on the generated output to make sure that it actually is high quality? And then we take the output of that. Invariably, the first time around, there's a couple of tests that might fail. Like, oh, you failed to mention that we require contact information for participants, things like that. And so that goes back in another iteration. And so then we refine the prompt in response to the failed test and say, okay, make sure you include the contact information in the generated output. And so that's the way to get there. It took us a while to figure this out, but now we are actively working with customers to generate protocols for them. And it's really exciting times.
Love that. And so some of that you mentioned, is that part of like the real-time collaboration and feasibility assessments as well, or is that a completely separate thing?
Well, I mean, real time in the sense that you get results pretty quickly and you can get sort of human experts to review the output. And in addition to the failed test sort of guidance, there might also be some human guidance that says, you know what, I'd like that section to be a little bit longer. Or there's another part that wasn't in the checklist that you need to include as well, because our standards at our company might require this additional information that Faro's default templates don't require. And so it's always useful to have a human look over the results. You're still saving vast amounts of authoring time because, the time required to just pour through different documents and to write out this documentation, get it reviewed and so on, that's where you're really saving the time. So we're really excited about that. And we're seeing a lot of interest in the marketplace as far as these capabilities.
I bet. What does a typical timeline look like without using Faro Health?
I mean, clinical documentation can take, from weeks to months, to write.
Really?
And so
Really?
we're saving
Wow.
that amount of time. Yeah. And we can do turnaround in a matter of, an hour for an initial version. So
That's
it's,
crazy.
hugely. And so it's not like, oh, we're going to, eliminate all these jobs, because there's still manual, there's still human sort of review required. It's just going to accelerate a process that currently takes a long time, and hopefully eliminate a bunch of errors down the line, because a lot of the information in these documents is sort of repeated, right? It's copied and pasted, and so if there's changes required, it's kind of a laborious process to propagate those changes through a series of different documents. Whereas here, you just regenerate, and it's much easier.
Okay, very cool. And you guys, I don't know how recent it was, but I had a partnership with, was it Recursion? Is that
Yeah.
who it is? Can you talk about that, about what that is and how that's working?
Yeah, I was super excited about Recursion. As it happens, they actually also, this is totally independently, they were a Two Sigma Ventures, Two Sigma Ventures, which is one of the groups I used to work with at Two Sigma, is actually an investor. But Recursion, they're a great sort of mid-cap pharma company that's using AI to select which drugs to test with for which indication. They're really sort of super on the cutting edge of clinical sort of drug discovery and that kind of area. And it's a perfect match because they already understand AI. And so they really took to our product, and we're working with them in a number of different ways to make their clinical trials more efficient.
That's awesome. Very cool. How did that come about?
I think they came to us. Like this could have been an inbound. I'm not sure. I'd have to ask the salespeople.
Yeah.
But I was super excited when they came on board because it's a familiar name to me.
Oh, that's cool. Love that. Yeah, it's nice when you see like your career path and people that you've, whether it's a company or people that you've touched or been involved with, coming back to whatever you're currently working on now, seeing that evolution and how they match together down the line. You can never see it at the time, right? But that's pretty cool.
Absolutely. Really delightful. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it happens again and again in very unexpected ways. It's all
Really?
a mystery, isn't it?
Yeah. In your opinion, what are the most pressing challenges in clinical trial design, and how are you guys addressing those?
So if you really want to make a clinical trial to design a trial that's really efficient and learns from all the experiences and the results from the past, this requires a ton of analysis and research, right? It requires the clinical scientist, to really kind of look at the latest research, to look at previous trials, to do all this kind of digging to help inform the design of the trial. And so our goal at Faro is to automate all of this. And so we're currently working on technology that we hope to be able to alpha test with customers later on this year, that essentially pulls down all the clinical trials that are out there, tens of thousands of trials that are publicly available in PDF form from clinicaltrials.gov and other sources. And essentially we built a data pipeline that uses Gen AI to extract all the necessary and relevant trial design information out of those PDFs. And so we'll take images, we'll take tables, we'll take just raw text. And we've built this really rich knowledge graph and data repository around each of those trials. So as a result, you can take a trial that maybe you're working on right now as a clinical scientist. Let's just say it's a solid tumor oncology trial. And you can say, hey, Faro, AI system, give me examples of trials that are kind of like this, like basically oncology solid tumor trials, but have a lower patient burden. Just give us some criteria. And normally this would be quite a laborious research exercise of just going through tons of PDFs and basically building up this knowledge yourself. And our system can, in a matter of seconds, say, oh, okay, well, here's 4 trials you should look at. And here's why they have lower patient burden. Here are the specific activities in our library that, they have or don't have that make this, a better trial in this respect. And so you can have this kind of research dialogue with the system to really very rapidly converge on an efficient design. So in our view, this is our vision. This is the future of clinical trial development, where it really leverages AI combined with a very structured and comprehensive trial repository to be able to essentially assist you during the process of something that normally would take a long time and require tons of work that I think many people just can't, they don't have the time for. And so as a result, we should get much better clinical trials out there for sponsors and patients and sites.
It's very cool. Yeah, I think when you said like people using it, to me with AI, within a number of different industries, a number of different ways, sometimes you don't, like you said, the people don't have the time to do the work, but they know like how to do it. It takes long. These are the steps I've got to do and all of that stuff. What I've found is talking to people in different industries about AI and AI tools that are out there and available, they can't even get their head around initially, or they can't think outside of the box initially enough to realize how they can adopt the tool or what it has the power to do. And that's a whole like education section and adoption section that you have to kind of overcome first to get people to use it. Is there a path that you guys go down for that, or like partner with schools or labs or people? I'm not sure.
I mean, we have a whole group that really works on engaging with the customer and helping them become self-sufficient with the tool as soon as possible. And so this has proven really effective. Like we're a couple of iterations into this. We've worked with a number of different customers, and now we're at the point where we can get them up and running with the tool pretty quickly. That said, I do think that once we have more sort of conversational AI capabilities, like you could imagine you're working on a trial and the system even proactively says to you, you know what, you're heading down a path where you're likely to get amendments because there's going to be protocol violations, or because basically you won't be able to enroll patients. Here are some suggestions like A, B, and C, some alternative designs, or maybe you might want to remove these two potentially unnecessary activities, or rethink your objectives and endpoints, like just kind of really making it very natural, the process of really kind of coming up with an optimal trial design. And so I think over time, this is going to become easier as we have more and more sort of capabilities to really talk to the system and refine the design using a really natural interface. As it is, we have really comprehensive tools for doing this, and we have these insights that are updated in real time that will tell you, okay, the change you're making is going to result in a reduction in patient burden or blood draw, or an increase in complexity. You might want to rethink this. And so the system provides you with a lot of real-time feedback that enables you to really fine-tune the design.
Like that. Yeah, that's really cool. Are there any common misconceptions about clinical trial design that you'd love to debunk while you're on the show?
I mean, I guess the main one would be sort of more is more. Like, I know there's this kind of natural tension between perhaps the clinical scientists and the clinical operations people who execute the trial, where I think scientists love data, like let's collect more and more data. And then the clinical operations people are like, well, wait a sec, there's a lot of blood draw there. And so that's the kind of the bridge we're trying to really create between those two groups, which is, okay, we don't want to run into issues downstream because the trial is too complex and burdensome. How do we head that off at the design stage rather than having to file amendments later on or restart the trial or whatever to actually make the patients happy and want to enroll? And so I think that maybe trial bloat, like just sort of really figuring out that right balance between the data you want to collect in order to meet your endpoints and making the trial actually, usable for or palatable for patients and sites. This is the balance. This is the dance that I think, needs to be kind of resolved here. I'd have to think about other myths that I want to bust.
Yeah.
But maybe I'll get back.
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
This, AI it's progressing so quickly. I think every month it blows my mind, even thinking, 18, 24 months ago, I was definitely not having these types of conversations with neighbors or in-laws or whatever. But now every month or every week, sometimes it seems like there's a new breakthrough, there's a new tool, there's new advancements. If you're looking ahead like 5, 10 years, 10 years is probably crazy to think about, 5 years, maybe. How do you see AI transforming the healthcare space and clinical trial sectors and the industries that you guys touch? Yeah,
I mean, if you consider DeepSeek, right? This is kind of the name that's on everyone's minds and conversations these days in the AI sphere. They kind of came out of nowhere, seemingly, and disrupted everybody. And NVIDIA's stock tanked 17%, and all this stuff happened because they're basically able to offer AI inference at 1/20th the cost of GPT, which is just unreal. And they got there. It gets a bit esoteric, right? I mean, there were some mathematical advances behind what they're doing that resulted in them being able to train their system much more efficiently. And the math involved is so advanced that the press doesn't even really talk about it because it's just, what are you going to say, right? It's just a little bit too esoteric. And so it's you're right. I mean, there's advances occurring that are resulting in these really, really huge advances in terms of reducing cost and so on. And what that's going to mean is that it just becomes more and more pervasive, because currently there is a bit of a cost. There's definitely cost associated with any AI related feature, certainly related to LLMs, right? Where every single word that you put into it and every single word you get out costs like this. And that sort of adds up to the point where when you generate a document of the complexity of a clinical trial, you could be spending, say, $20 or give or take an order of magnitude, right? In terms of tokens and costs with the LLM. And so that is an obstacle. That means you can't use this technology to generate every single document that you might imagine because there's a cost there. And so as a result, in 5 years' time, like with, DeepSeek today has already cut that cost in 1/20th in principle. In 5 years' time, it's hard to imagine it'll be close to free. And so it'll be much more pervasive. That's one thing. I think another is that just our, Faro and other groups like us that are really pushing the envelope as far as how do you leverage all of the structured data? How do you mine all the data that's out there, that's clinical, and really in a structured way, extract all the knowledge from it? It means these systems are going to get much smarter. And able to process tons more documents. Like every single new research paper, we can ingest that and basically factor that into our database, because the cost will come down. We can do that with everything. And so that will result in a system that's much more informed and much faster and much, more cost effective in terms of being able to explore alternatives. I could imagine a world where we start just generating designs for the user and just say, in the background, I just generated 100 variants of this trial and here are the best ones, this kind of thing. Where today that would be probably prohibitive cost-wise and time-wise. Stuff like that will become possible where we can really just tell the user, given your endpoints in your objectives for this trial, we've already figured it all out. Like, here's the top 5 most promising trials. Tell us which one you like, and we can iterate on that one. So I'm really excited by the possibilities for a really, truly, completely AI-driven design tool that can produce designs that maybe, aren't even sort of thinkable today, or it might not have sort of come up because it would require a lot of research and searching and trial and error to come up with such a design.
Yeah. It's fascinating to think about, really. How do you measure the success of Faro Health's platform? Are there particular metrics, or do you have like a success story in mind that you can say a customer has said it's moved the needle in this way for us?
Well, definitely I'd encourage people curious about that topic to look at the paper we published with Merck, where you can see quantitatively how much time and money essentially they saved by using our product. And so we co-wrote a paper with them describing this. And, because of what I said before, because when you make changes upstream, it kind of has a compounding effect as far as the impact on downstream in the trial that can go on for many, many years. The numbers get kind of staggering. Like taken at face value, it's just a no-brainer for any company out there that's developing, drugs, that's essentially trying to get them to market, to use a system like this, because over time the cost savings become like tens of millions of dollars plus. So why would you not do this, right? And so I thought that was really great that Faro was able to do this, even without all this advanced AI stuff we're talking about. The tool alone, was enough to, without the AI features, was enough to really give Merck like sort of cost saving, like significant cost savings.
That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, cost is one thing, right? But the time saving, you think about the quicker you can get through to that trial, the quicker you can have impact on the patients and the people in need. Exactly.
I mean, I think this was part of the whole analysis in the paper, but every day that gets delayed due to amendments or other factors in the trial costs significantly, like potentially millions of dollars of just lost drug sales that you could be, that are incurred from delayed launches. And so this is really material, for especially for the larger companies, but pretty much for any pharma company. Because bringing that revenue in affects the bottom line.
100%. You already touched on how this isn't going to replace human in the loop or take people's jobs or anything like that. But there's obviously that school of people that argue that integration of AI in any industry, but clinical trials right now, could lead to over-reliance on technology and potentially sideline human expertise. What's your perspective on that concern, or how do you address that with people in the industry?
I think it's a valid concern. I do think that, generally speaking, this is what technology does. Like, what is technology even for, right? It's to automate things that previously were done manually. And so what's happening with AI is that it's automating things that we didn't even think would be possible to be automated, at least in our lifetimes, perhaps. And so the LLMs have sort of pushed things forward quickly. And so that's kind of scary, right? All of a sudden, there's all these use cases. There's even a graph that I show when I present about these things at conferences, showing the rate at which mental tasks are being kind of like essentially sort of eclipsed by machine intelligence is accelerating. And so things that like handwriting recognition took a decade or more, decades actually, to reach human level of comprehension. Now things like math competitions that have only been tackled recently, it's taken like a year and change to get to near human level. So there's an accelerating effect, yes. Are we heading towards the Vinge singularity, whereby machine intelligence kind of like leaves us in the dust? Probably not yet. But it's something that I think really people should be paying attention to. Like I think open source is a way of mitigating the risk. It's sort of, in my mind, kind of necessary but not sufficient for us to really mitigate whatever risks there are of AI running amok and doing things that it shouldn't be doing. There are already examples of AI doing questionable things in order to reach its goals, not in the medical field but in other fields. And so I think that, and of course with self-driving cars, this is a very real issue, right? As far as how they behave under certain circumstances and so on. And so all this to say that I think that on the one hand, every time there's a technological advance, there's usually some aspect of automation there or some aspect of things being disrupted, right? And that's just the way technological kind of advances work. And in the long run, it creates new industries and fields and jobs and so on. However, that said, AI is kind of special and unusual. And I think there should be regulatory oversight. There should be certain amount of just attention paid to the capabilities and the evolution of these systems because it's changing so fast. And that's the subject of ongoing debate out there in the AI field.
Yeah, thanks for your input on that. As a CTO, when you're building your teams, what qualities do you prioritize, or what sort of backgrounds or skill sets do you really look for?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to have both a solid grounding in theoretical knowledge. Like we do look for people who ideally have PhDs or published papers and so on. Not strictly necessary, but it definitely shows that you have a command of the subject and you've in some ways advanced human knowledge in this area. But also real industry experience launching features that incorporate AI, particularly large language models, because these are new and there are nuances, as we found ourselves during the last year and a half, to launching real features that are useful and safe and performant and cost effective and so on, that I think are only really, I mean, we want to bring people on board with that experience. I think definitely curiosity, a really can-do attitude of just getting things done, even if it's necessary in a scrappy way, to prove concepts out is important, as well as being cognizant of what it takes to launch a feature in a mature sort of enterprise product. So there's a lot of things really, but the good news is there's lots of people out there. And I think that having a real mission makes a position attractive. Like having the mission of trying to essentially ultimately save lives, alleviate suffering, bring these powerful medications and treatments into people's hands and lives sooner and at lower cost. This is a mission that really resonates with a lot of people out there. And so I think that's an important ingredient to hiring top talent. I think another is having really smart people to work with and good people to work with. And so that's sort of something that compounds over time as you hire more good people. I think having a decent work culture that really values people's well-being and work-life balance and has just a sort of an affirmative kind of culture around people's growth and so on is also important. These are all important ingredients to be able to hire the best people.
For sure. That's great. I always like to hear what people prioritize, because you're obviously experienced at being at this level and growing teams at some of the biggest companies in the world, right? So it's always interesting to hear, even when you move from those kind of organizations to more of a startup or earlier stage, the things that you want to bring over and the perspectives that people need to have or backgrounds.
Yeah, I think the main difference in terms of startups versus big companies, I mean, they're very different environments. And so just having startup experience at all is preferable, right? I think there's a certain degree of specialization that happens in large companies where you're hired to do a particular job on a particular team. And Google had this saying like, oh, we love hiring generalists. But I think there's a certain specific kind of mindset that sets in, like, oh, I found my niche in this big organization, versus at a startup where sometimes you got to do a bit of sales. Sometimes you got to speak at a conference. Sometimes you got to, do things that normally someone in that role might not have to do, or learn things that you wouldn't normally have to do because there's some other person who has that role to take care of it, right? And so there's a certain startup attitude that comes where it's like, hey, I'm an owner in this company. I having that kind of mentality of, I want this product to be as good as it possibly can be because the success of the company is dependent upon it, is a really different mindset, I think, that you can pick up when you interview people.
It's very true. Love that. Is there any advice that you would offer to aspiring leaders or entrepreneurs looking to innovate in this industry? Is it in health tech or med tech or anything like that?
I think mainly if you're coming from the outside like I did, it's just really unusual and specific. And so just talking to experts, getting familiar with what are the data sets, what are the problems, what are the roles, how does this whole process work of, in our case, bringing a drug to market. And just learning. I think talking to really smart people who know about this stuff, really going to your network and figuring out who knows about this, who can I talk to? And just, there's tons of information out there, but just really sort of seeing like, what are people doing? Listening to podcasts like this, I think, is actually an excellent way of dipping your toes into it and just sort of hearing what other people are doing. And I think, data science is a question of what data sets are available, what kinds of things do you want to predict. So just learning about those things. But I will say that it is a pretty particular industry, both in terms of its process and also the regulatory environment, and just the nuances of doing life science are a little different from, well, I'd say very different from other industries I've worked in, like e-commerce or finance and so on. It's a lot more real in the sense that there's human lives involved. And so that's really different. And I think a lot of people are drawn to the field because of that, which is, really great.
All right, before we wrap, is there anything else that you'd like our listeners to know about Faro Health, what you guys are working on, what's to come, what we should keep a lookout for, or anything like that? Yeah,
I mean, we're going to be posting on our site and in LinkedIn. This is a lot of where we post new things. So stay tuned there. Follow us on LinkedIn. We'll be at DFarm in September. I'll probably be speaking there about AI, and that's where I typically talk about new things as well. And I guess just feel free to reach out, especially if you are facing these challenges I've been talking about related to clinical trial design and development. Feel free to reach out, and we can maybe see if there's a partnership that's possible there. And I think just also feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn and connect. Maybe we can put a link to my profile in the podcast page. But it's a super interesting area. I think there's so much innovation that's coming. We have document generation, we have this AI-based kind of assisted trial design, and many more things in the roadmap as well. So just stay tuned. It's really exciting times.
Perfect. Well, look, Patrick, thank you so much for taking the time, for sharing your insights, your experience, and telling us all about Faro Health. It's really fascinating, and I really enjoyed this conversation. So thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Me too. Thanks for having me on the show.
My pleasure. And we will link your LinkedIn, the website, everything in the show notes. And if you could send me the link to that paper that you mentioned as well, we'll put that in there too.
Absolutely.
Perfect. All right. Well, take care. Hopefully I'll speak to you soon.
Yeah. Thanks, Greg.